Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about Starfinder and the book Pathfinder had that was like a sci fi fantasy book called Distant Worlds. Now, when I first learned about this and I was getting into Pathfinder, I was just thrilled because that's my favorite genre. I guess you call it like sci fi and fantasy, like John Carter. That's what this book is. For the sake of time, I can't really go into every single planet in its solar system. I'll just try to talk about what correlates to the things I was going to say about Starfinder. Because we don't know that much about Starfinder. At least I don't. I mean, what I've read was just a whole thin book with some of the creatures in it, but there weren't that many races in it, and it kind of worried me. A lot of the races were just ones they just made, and they weren't. Don't get me wrong, they weren't bad. It's just I thought I'd see something more alien than like a cricket race than a lizard man race, and then they. That's one of the only complaints I ever have with Paizo is their iconic character design. Sometimes there's not good. The soldier one they made that's like a fighter class. This just wasn't a good character. But despite that, the game has a lot of promise, and if it's anything like Distant Worlds, it'll be great. But in Distant Worlds, there's the solar system Pathfinder's in is almost every planet's inhabited, even the one that's like Mercury called Abalon, and it's inhabited by machines. And these aren't like metal boxy robot guys. They look like you, they have several forms. Usually, most of them look kind of like spiders, I guess you could say. But the sheet just gives you a list of base stats and all this other crap you can add on it, like armor plating, a plasma cutter. You can adjust its movements to make it look different. I mean, it's like build your own robots, except at least the ones in this, say they need to have sunlight. Now, later on down the line near the asteroid belt, you have these robots jumping on asteroids, and they obviously aren't getting that much sun. But for the sake of time, I can't really go into every single thing about this series. I just highly recommend buying this book because the things I'm going to get into later are pretty interesting. It's, I think for the PDF it was like $13, but it's, I mean, if even if you didn't like playing games like this, just reading all this crap is it's just so well written. But I was going to get into some of the races. So in Starfinder, we have it just has these random stats for different things, but it's not like a list of races in that little book that started with. So it kind of gives me hope. Like one of the races you could play as is from like their version of Mars called Akaton, and it's a lot like John Carter of Mars, except like there's red men, there's things kind of like Tharks, except for these guys. It's called the Contemplatives of Ashok, and they just look like imagine a floating brain, and underneath it is a tiny body curled up like a fetus, but it looks almost like an insect, like a humanoid body with an exoskeleton and no real fingers, just little kind of bug claw things, like if you look at the feet of a bug up close. And these guys can float with their brain. They have several at will spell like abilities like Mage Hand, Magic Missile that they use with their thoughts. Of course, they can communicate telepathically, but in Distant Worlds, the sort of eerie thing is some people think that is their goal for all intelligent life to become like this. But you can play as these guys as Starfinder. Now, outside of that planet, Pathfinder planets, to be honest, I don't really know the total number. I just know it's more than 9. I want to say 11. But after we get out of Mercury, we have Castrovel, which is like Venus. It has a interesting race called the Lashunta. I don't want to say Amazonian because they're not evil or crazy like the Greek Amazons. They have a lot of sexual dimorphism. The women are really tall and most people consider attractive. And the men are very short and stout like a dwarf. Imagine like a little short, hairy, muscular dwarf. But they both have antennas on their heads. And they both are pretty good at fighting. The planet runs like the females run the show. Like they're really good at strategizing and politics, and the men are like the craftsmen. I imagine the foot soldiers. They kind of make it out like they use the males like they just throw a whole lot of them at some kind of threat, and the females make these plans of how it works. I know the males do it, but I always see the females riding these huge lizard creatures they communicate with telepathically, kind of like those things on Avatar. But both of those races would be fun to play just because their personalities differ. And both of these people, they're good at fighting, and they value like mental skills too, which is kind of neat. But outside of Venus, we go to our planet, the setting, which is like each of one of these planets has a name. Like Abalon is the Mercury planet. It's called the Horse because it goes around fast. Castrovel is called the Greens. It's green. Akaton's the red. Our planet, they nicknamed it the Cage, which I love because none of the other scholars who did that, they called it the Child. It's the Cage because of Robogog. He's like a big ugly worm thing that the gods couldn't kill for whatever reason, and they just locked him up in a demiplane in the planet. So the planet has a giant angry worm that can't die in it. But for the sake of time, I don't need to ramble about this stuff. After we get out of there, we get Diversities, which is it's in Starfinder. It's a entirely locked planet. There's a or the race there has different cast. One is for cybernetics, so of course they'd be in it. Then we have the asteroid belt, which is inhabited. That's one of the things you have to read. I can't remember all the stuff listed, but it's like you could make your own dungeon in it because there's so many things in there. It has its own race. They were actually in Starfinder, thankfully. Like I don't think the Lashunta were missions. You can play these guys are like they're supposed to be able to live in a vacuum in distant worlds. They can. They have energy wings. They use the solar wind to glide on the asteroids, and I think it's Starfinder. They're toned down a bit, but whenever you get out of these planets, it starts to get interesting. Now, this is one of my favorite aspects of probably Pathfinder, these next planets that come up. We have the gas giants. And you start off with Saturn instead of Jupiter and Pathfinder. And Saturn, the main race are centaur-like people. We don't really get a lot of info on them, but that's what worried me that went in Starfinder. Hardly anything in the moons were in Starfinder, and all these moons have intelligent races almost. These centaur people, their planet periodically gets the atmosphere swapped with the Saturn planet, which is, I think I have it down here, the Avarin. And the giant predators that dwell within also follow these gas clouds, which would be a pretty cool adventure. And some of the planets are, one is called the insectoid moon. I said planet, it's moons that revolve around us. And it's these bug people, arthropods, that have all kinds of different types, and they all follow a pseudo deity, I guess, called the Forever Queen, which is like a giant queen, like an insect, but I guess it reincarnates every time it dies. And one of the main races in Starfinder are like these cricket locust people that broke away from a hive mind, and it's a well thought out race because they value individuality and they get pleasure from doing choices, just being able to choose things. But they just look like crickets. Like they have a lizard race that's like the warrior race, and I mean I was hoping for a little bit more diversity, but our solar system and Pathfinder has plenty of diversity. I mean they should have just had a stat block for every one of these guys. Even the centaurs would have been kind of neat. But these bugs are a lot more diverse. We don't get a lot of info on them. There's a lot of room, except for something called a philosopher worm, which is like a priest caste, I guess. But some of the other moons are. There's one moon where nothing's there. We had a intelligent race, but nobody's there in some event called the Taking. We don't know what that is. And there's a moon with these people that think they're perfect. We don't get a lot of info on them, but a lot of these are just kind of like lets you kind of build your own thing. And what's the other one? Actually, I think those are most of the important moons of that planet. The Jupiter one's called the Cradle because it has so many moons. That's a cool looking aquatic race. We have crystalline people. I didn't mention this before, but there's one moon that's the centaurs tried to colonize, and it's not the whole planet, it's just the upper atmosphere. It's the lower atmosphere is toxic jungles full of predators. But anyways, the Jupiter planet, we got a poison moon, kind of like that, with these. It's just radiation, but there's an intelligent race of feline-like creatures that are skinny, really skinny, black. We can't see fur. There's a volcanic moon, but it's just all this room for growth you could put in a game. But once we get out of this, the last planets are the best. Now, my favorite planet, one of my favorite aspects of this game, is a planet called Apostate. Now, or Apostate. No one knows what's inside this planet. All they do is they see this rocky looking asteroid the size of a moon with big metal doors. But the book tells us what's inside the planet. It's not a planet, it's a spaceship. And I think this is related to the Lovecraft stuff they put in these games because this spaceship cannot, nothing divine can get inside. The gods can't do anything inside, nothing evil from the Dark Tapestry can get inside. But this ship has been here in our system trapped for a very long time. Because this will be the planet I'll elaborate the most, it's my favorite. And it ties into Starfinder. We don't know what the crew was. We just know in the game that it says that they were able taking specimens or dropping them off on planets. And there's a section lower in the world ship with millions of different races in stasis. They're wearing clothes we wouldn't recognize because they're from forever ago. But this kind of leads to the main inhabitants of the ship because they're not the main inhabitants. We don't know who made the ship because all that's left are a race called the Ilee. Now, the Ilee are interesting kind of the way they reproduce because they all go to a place called the Chamber of Life where they stand in a beam of light. It scans their genes, it mixes their genes, and makes a baby for them that they pick up at a later time. Why do you wonder they do this? Because no one Ilee looks the same. They've been using genetic material probably from all the races they've created so long. We get to a point where when I say I don't mean the same, I mean if they say in the book if people came from the Pathfinder world to see these guys, they'd be horrified because they all look exactly the same. The diversity could be a worm with fins all over it, a creature that looks like just a mass of tentacles and eyes, something that might look completely normal like a human except they have an arm growing out of their forehead with a mouth on the end of it. I mean, these things can be anything. I mean, with this, I don't know if Starfinder's gonna have a make your own alien kit. With this, you could keep it in the solar system. You could put anything you wanted together within reason that wasn't like indestructible and make it from apostate, assuming that they're able to get them out of the planet because they're trapped. And they need to get them out because they need more genetic diversity. I mean, we don't know how long they can keep doing this because whenever they do this, their little mating thing, it doesn't always work. Sometimes the offspring are so strange they can't move or speak or something. And instead of killing these people, giving them some kind of mercy, they just leave them out in the open. But they don't all die. Now, it doesn't elaborate a lot, but the Ilee communicates several different ways with hand signs, maybe biolights, vocals. They all can communicate. But these creatures, without a source of knowledge, if they survive, they just become feral monsters. And I imagine with the Ilee, the division between monster and person is close because they can be almost anything. Now, and the ship provides them food within some reason like fungus and stuff. But in these deserted lands, they have these monstrous creatures that don't speak; they just kill, and that's kind of like the wilderness there. Which it's all in a ship underground with the tunnels light a little bit, kind of like the Darklands, a little bit more interesting. Now, that might be the most interesting planet, but it's certainly not the most horrifying because it's something that might work with some games, but one of the only complaints I have with Pathfinder is the Lovecraft stuff. Now, I have like a love-hate relationship with that guy's stuff because I like the more alien than alien aspects, but the horror doesn't really work for me. It makes all the protagonists seem like they're spineless, and I don't like how he just makes these creatures unstoppable just because they're so horrible we can't look at them. There's nothing you can do about it when you have a universe full of other gods and stuff. But pushing all that aside, complaining, this planet is neat. The last one is called Octurne, or the Stranger. Very well named, because this is twice the size of the planet, the player's planet. The atmosphere is toxic. It mutates whoever gets inside it horribly. Like, they have a list of things that happen, like your brain could bust out of your skull, but you'd be alive. Your skin could start melting off into a slimy layer that lets you move faster for some reason. Just all kinds of stuff. You don't have protection. But this is a normal planet, of course, being related to Lovecraft stuff. It's alive. And I don't mean like Ego from Guardians of the Galaxy alive. I mean, this thing has skin. It has blood that, of course, makes people go insane if they drink it. and it has native inhabitants, unfortunately. But there's nothing biological, nothing that makes sense in this place. It's all kinds of insane stuff, like skinless people walking around with bizarre beasts. I think the most disturbing place was called the Loving Place because it's kind of implied this planet is alive and it might have had sex because it's pregnant. But in the Loving Place, this gas exudes from the ground, and it's filled with even worse creatures than usual. And these creatures will just find and violate whatever they can, which it doesn't matter what sex this is, man or a woman, it makes them pregnant and they birth more monsters and they start to enjoy it. And it's this kind of cycle. One reason why that's the last planet I want to play on, but I said it was pregnant. There's I think it's called the Graben Mound, where it's shooting these chunks of flesh out of the ground, and it's implied it'll give birth some type of stillborn demigod or something, which would be like a mythic adventure, assuming the devs don't pull the thing they do with Cthulhu and make it unstoppable. But I mean, who knows? That might be something for you get to blow up with a ship in Starfinder. But see, that's what I hope in Starfinders. They let you play something like the I-League, like make your own character. That'd be amazing. And the Apostate story is incredible. But there's also a planet called Eox, the Dead. Now, it's like the reason there's an asteroid field, because they tried to blow up that planet. They succeeded, didn't kill the native inhabitants. They destroyed their atmosphere. Everything's undead or mutated terribly. Like the Starfinder book tells us about one of the creatures, which is like saying it's an elephant doesn't give it justice. This giant tortured creature that sucks out the life energy of whatever it finds. It's actually a danger to undead too. But the reason I mention Eox is because it's full of undead, and in Starfinder it's still led by the liches who survived the cataclysm called the Bone Sages. And because they can't reproduce, they import corpses and animate undead. And it would just be awesome if they let you play as an undead character like that. Like in a normal Pathfinder game, this would be way overpowered, but I'd like to play an incorporeal undead called a shadow, which is like imagine a ghost, but you can't see through it. It has kind of teeth-looking things, and I mean it's like an animate shadow, but they're intelligent. They're not mindless undead. Now sometimes they are, but knowing the Bone Sages and the technology they have, they could make them intelligent. That'd be fun to play because you got to remember it's a sci-fi setting. So even an incorporeal creature, this is a creature that can't wear armor or really use weapons, and that's its only defense. So it would kind of even the playing field a little, while giving unique abilities like go through walls and stuff. And that'd be a kind of a neat, maybe reformed assassin character that got their right mind back and might want revenge against the Oxens, but only being able to do negative energy damage. He can't do anything, so he has to get people to help him. There's so many interesting undead stories you can make. I mean, like I mostly play good characters, but you still make something cool with that. But that's just my thoughts on the game, so hopefully it'll be good.